Hey guys, it's Destiny, and today we're going to be doing tier list review. Now that Lingsha has been out for a few days now, and I've gotten to do quite a lot of tests regarding her, I wanted to share my thoughts today on wherever she ended up getting placed, as well as asking you guys your opinions on the tier list as well. Before we get into today's video, let me know one of your favorite shows. And also, if you guys enjoy videos like these, do make sure to subscribe, leave a like to support the video, and now let's get straight into it. So as you guys can see, here is the Pride Win tier list. This recently got updated for the release of Lingsha, so I thought we'd go over that, and we can also take a look at Pure Fiction and Apocalyptic Shadow for today's video as well. So if we just scroll a little bit down, okay, here we go. Here is Lingsha. So as we can see on the Memory of Chaos tier list, Lingsha is at tier 0.5, which I think this is actually a very good placement for her. Arguably, she could also maybe be in tier 0. I personally think Lingsha has quite a lot to her kit that can make her either in that tier 0 or 0.5, which when it comes to her skill kit, she is going to heal your team honestly quite a lot. Her skill is able to heal the team, her ultimate will heal the team, her follow-ups will heal the team. She just has so much ways of healing that your team will essentially stay healthy throughout the entire fight. And to additionally add to that, of course, as I mentioned, those follow-ups. Her follow-ups are honestly really nice for the factor of being able to deal additional toughness breaking to enemies, especially enemies that are fire weak, and also the factor of her being able to dispel one debuff from all allies whenever her follow-up happens. So let's say you get dominated by Kafka, for example, which funnily enough, I actually had in one of my showcases. Lingsha actually got dominated herself, and Fuyuin still came in because of the emergency heal in Lingsha's kit, which I'll get into that in a little second here. But basically, Fuyuin came in and then immediately cleansed Lingsha, so I was able to use Lingsha again pretty quick after that, which is really nice that Lingsha has that utility. Even if Lingsha does get crowd controlled herself, Fuyuin will still act on its own, which means if Lingsha were to, of course, get hit with that crowd control debuff and you can't really use her in the moment, Fuyuin will just be able to cleanse that off of her. So that's just really nice utility that Lingsha has, and the fact of her ultimate being able to 100% advance Fuyuin on top of that means, let's say, use her ultimate and the whole team is low on HP. Well, the ultimate will heal, and then of course that follow-up directly afterwards will heal as well. And let's say you were inflicted with a debuff, well, now that debuff is also going to go away on top of that. So in my opinion, Lingsha's kit just at a baseline has a lot of utility when it comes to just keeping the team very, very healthy with your heals, as well as also, of course, being able to contribute towards weakness breaking enemies due to the fact that if you were to have her follow-up happen and then you immediately use her ultimate, her follow-up will immediately happen again due to the 100% action in advance. So because of that, you essentially will have 3 attacks back to back. And let's say you're playing Lingsha on, like, let's say a break team, right? And the enemies are fire weak, this will help contribute quite a lot to reducing the toughness meters of those enemies and potentially even breaking them depending on where that toughness meter is before you unleash basically a wombo combo of attacks, if you will. On top of that, Lingsha's skill will also advance forward Fuyuin by 20%, which if you do use her skill a bit more often, you will have Fuyuin act sooner, so that's pretty nice. And another thing about Lingsha, when it comes to her skill point efficiency, what's really nice is that Lingsha has a trace called Sylvain Smoke, and basically whenever she uses her basic attack, she will regenerate 10 energy. And because of that, it will essentially make her be able to use a 3-turn ultimate by using either 3 basics or 3 skills if she is holding an energy regen rope. So because of that, you essentially have the option between using your basic attacks more often or using your skill more often. It's ultimately up to you depending on how many skill points you do have available. So that's a really nice benefit that she has, and that can definitely help toward the concern of, okay, she's not really skill point efficient. It kind of just depends on how you end up playing her and just how many skill points you do have on the team you're using with her. But do keep in mind throughout a fight is more than likely you will have to use her skill at some point due to the fact that Fuyuin has an action count and it starts off with an action count of 3. So once Fuyuin does 3 follow-up attacks, then Fuyuin will disappear from the field. The way to replenish this would be to use Lingsha's skill, which will increase that action count by 3. And you can have a maximum up to 5. So eventually you will have to use a skill, but even then at that point, you can still mix in more basic attacks than skills if you choose to, which can allow her to be pretty efficient with her skill points, once again, just depending on how you play her, ultimately what team you use her on. As for her additional benefits though, which comes in with her traces, she does have a trace called Ember's Echo, and I really like this trace. Whenever a character on the team has their HP at 60% or below, Fuyuin will essentially come in, and this follow-up attack will not consume Fuyuin's action count either. This can trigger every 2 turns, but essentially this is really good for being able to have essentially an emergency heal, which is something that Luocha actually has. And then for Lingsha's Trace Vermilion Waft, this will increase her attack and outgoing healing dependent on how much break effect she has, so this is just nice for being able to actually improve her healing by quite a bit. If you do invest, of course, break effect into her, which you will want to do this. She can definitely take advantage of super break damage very, very well. And for those that weren't aware, Lingsha's healing is actually based off of her attack. So having more break effect on her, which if I'm not mistaken for Vermilion Waft, you will want about 200% break effect to maximize the amount of attack as well as outgoing healing you can get. So when you have that going on, now your healing is just super freaking nice. And on top of that, when it comes to just break damage in general, Lingsha's ultimate will also inflict Befog onto enemies, which when enemies are inflicted with Befog, they will take increased break damage, and this will last for 2 turns. So if you do decide to use her on a break-centric team, then this will be a very, very useful thing to take advantage of, not only for the team's damage, but also Lingsha's personal damage, since Lingsha can actually do quite a lot of damage with super breaks, so that's awesome. And on top of that, which this is really interesting, and I actually got to test this out on stream, Lingsha can oddly enough also be pretty fun with a crit build. I wouldn't say to go all out on the crit build though, but it is a pretty fun thing, and it actually does pretty decent damage if you do decide to use her with supports that can further amplify her damage. So for example, when I did this on stream, I was using Robin, Sparkle, Hunt March 7th, on Memory of Chaos floor 12, the first side. And if I'm not mistaken, I was actually able to get a 1 cycle with this particular team. So it was just actually really interesting to see that work out the way it did. So Lingsha has quite a lot of versatility in what she can provide. And I also think that when it comes to, let's say you pair her up with Firefly, for example, which a lot of us are likely going to be doing that, Lingsha will be able to synergize very nicely with Firefly. Whenever Firefly uses her skill, that will actually reduce her HP by 40%, which means this will actually trigger Lingsha's Trace, Ember's Echo, due to now Firefly being at 60% health or even lower, depending on how much HP she had. And because of Firefly being able to implant fire weakness onto enemies, Lingsha is now going to be able to use that wombo combo I mentioned earlier, where you have the follow-up, then the ultimate, then the follow-up again, and she will heavily help contribute towards helping break enemies on top of what Firefly is already able to break. This is just an incredibly nice synergy. Another thing I'd note is that Lingsha also works on follow-up teams. I did actually showcase her with Feixiao before. I did Feixiao, Topaz, Robin, and Lingsha, and I also did Feixiao, Boba March, Robin, and Lingsha as well, and they were both able to get a 0 cycle on the first side of Memory of Chaos. So that team was pretty nice because of the fact that due to Lingsha being able to use her follow-ups as frequently as she can, she actually can help really nicely with being able to get Feixiao more Flying Aureus stacks, allowing Numbi to attack more frequently, and then also being able to assist with getting Robin more energy for her ultimate, just because of how frequently the follow-up attacks can potentially happen. It's a pretty nice synergy that she's able to provide on that team. And when it comes to just Lingsha's value overall, which I feel like I've been talking about Lingsha for quite a while now, I just have a lot to say about her because I feel like before she came out, a lot of people were on the fence about her, just like, okay, she doesn't really seem that valuable. But I personally was like, I feel like she's actually going to be pretty good, honestly, because of how much utility she has in her kit and the potential she has to work on teams other than break, depending on how frequently she can use her follow-ups, how useful her additional utility will be on other team comps as well. So I feel like when it comes to Lingsha's overall value, when it comes to just a healer in general, she will still be able to provide very, very adequate healing, as well as, of course, that cleansing, which I mentioned. And if you do get hit with a crowd control debuff, those honestly do suck, since it can result in one of your characters actually going down, depending on what kind of crowd control debuff it is. what the enemy ends up doing afterwards. So I feel like Lingsha being able to not only have an emergency heal, but also her follow-ups always being able to cleanse one debuff from all allies. I feel like this is a really important piece of her kit to consider when it comes to how does she perform, or like, is she worth it for just general team comps as well. Now that's just my opinion on it. I would love to know what you guys think about Lingsha in particular. And overall, I do think she's very much worthy of her spot at 0.5. Could potentially argue for tier 0. And I honestly think the characters in the Apex category, like for all of them, when it comes to the damage dealers, the specialist characters, which is, you know, Firefly, Boothill, Topaz, whatever it may be, the amplifiers and the sustains, I feel like a lot of these characters are very much worthy of the spots they're at. And I'd love to know if you guys think, like, let's say any of these characters down here, which are meta characters, if you feel like they should actually be in the Apex category, or if they should stay in the meta character category. Speaking of which, though, the Memory of Chaos tier list hasn't really changed much at all since the last time I reviewed it. But I thought I'd just share some of my additional thoughts, or rather some of my criticisms as well, of the current tier list. One thing I noticed is that Yunli and Clara are really close to one another when it comes to their ranking, or rather their position on the tier list, which I thought I'd just ask you guys, do you guys feel like it's only a 0.5 difference between Yunli and Clara? Keep in mind, these are E0 Yunli, E0 Clara. I'd love to know your thoughts on that, because I personally feel like the gap is a little bit larger. This is just my personal opinion, of course, but I do feel like Yunli being in 0.5 is definitely valid. But I personally would probably move Clara to like 1.5 personally. I don't think the gap between them is personally this small. Now, once again, just my personal opinion. Maybe that was a little bit of a hot take. You guys can let me know, but that's just through my experience of playing both of these characters. I do think, though, Clara is a very nice standard character, 100%. I'm just not too sure if this gap in between is a little too small. And then if we look at the rest of the tier list, so if I'm not mistaken, last time I believe they dropped Jingyuan, which I feel like they didn't have to do that. I believe he was at 1.5. I do think they honestly could have kept him there. I've seen some pretty cool Jingyuan showcases as of lately as well. And I think the 1.5 category was honestly fine. I do like that Himeko has been slowly going up. If I'm not mistaken, Himeko used to literally be at tier 4. And now she's up to tier 2. If I'm mistaken, it might have been tier 3. Regardless, though, she has gone up over time, which is awesome. And I do think the more characters we've been getting that synergize with her, it's been helping out quite a lot. Like, for example, in Pure Fiction, at least, I really like Himeko and Lingsha together. I feel like they're awesome, especially on the second side of the current Pure Fiction. They're really, really good. Oh, another criticism I also have personally is I feel like they could have kept Bailu. If I'm not mistaken, she was beside Japard. I do feel like they could have kept Bailu beside Japard. Bailu's revive is still pretty nice utility due to the fact that enemies hit pretty hard sometimes. So that utility can come in pretty clutch, especially if one of your characters goes down. Or let's say you're playing one of the endgame modes. And I've actually been playing Divergent Universe as of lately, but let's say one of your characters goes down, then Bailu's revive can really help out with that. Especially if, let's say, a character just keeps getting targeted nonstop, which sometimes that happens. The revive can come in very handy. So that's why personally, I feel like that type of utility, I would say at least should be tier 2, but that's just my personal opinion when it comes to Bailu. I'm really curious to see if March will eventually also go up, because I've been keeping my eye out on March. I feel like she's just such a good 4-star character that I could potentially see her maybe going up a little bit in the future, maybe in 0.5, depending on what type of characters we get. But for right now, tier 1, in my opinion, is really good. I just feel like she has really, really nice synergies. Follow-up characters, you can even use her on super break teams. She just has quite a lot in her kit that makes her an awesome option, which I highly recommend to all of you to consider potentially building Hunt March 7th, because she's just awesome. And one other thing I thought I'd note real quick before we potentially move on, I'm going to look through real quick if I have another opinion, but Boothill in 0.5 and then Firefly in tier 0. So this might be just a little bit as well of a hot take, but I think an argument can be made for Boothill potentially also being in tier 0. I feel like over time, Boothill has shown he is just an amazing boss nuker. He is able to implant physical weakness onto an enemy, and he just does so much freaking damage, especially if you get all of his pocket trick shots activated. He has multiple partners you can consider using with him. I recently used a no sustain Boothill on side 2 of Memory of Chaos, which is against Aventurine, and Boothill just kind of just destroys Aventurine, which is really funny to see. There's actually a little trick you can use with Boothill, which is whenever you use his skill on an enemy, this will of course put them in the standoff state. But let's say you have one of your character's ultimates active, let's say Pela, right? And then Pela breaks that enemy. Boothill will actually be able to use another skill on a different enemy now. That enemy got broken, and this will gain him a stack of pocket trick shot, but now you can also focus on a different enemy and potentially break them as well as defeat them, which now can put you at 3 stacks of pocket trick shot, which I should be displaying on the screen right now what I'm talking about, just in case what I said is a little confusing. But this is a little Boothill trick that you guys can use, and it's actually pretty cool. Now do keep in mind, you will need to have that additional skill point. But aside from that, I think this is just super freaking cool to take advantage of, and it can definitely allow your Boothill to basically get all of his stacks very quickly into a fight. That's why I feel like Boothill can arguably be tier 0 alongside Firefly. I do think he's an amazing break DPS, especially for Memory of Chaos. As we can see though, he is tier 0 on Apocalyptic Shadow, which he's definitely worthy of that tier. But I do think maybe for Memory of Chaos, maybe he could be tier 0. I'd love to know what you guys think. Do you guys think he should say 0.5? Or do you guys think he could potentially actually go up? Because I feel like he's pretty good, honestly. Real quick though, let's go over Pure Fiction and Apocalyptic Shadow. I'm just gonna go over this kind of quickly so I don't take up too much of you guys' time. Lingsha is tier 0 when it comes to Pure Fiction, which I completely agree with this. Her being able to hit all enemies with her follow-ups, her skill, and then her ultimate. This provides a bunch of toughness breaking, especially if enemies are fire weak. If they are fire weak, this is amazing for a character like Himeko, because Himeko is going to be able to just unleash her follow-up super frequently because of this. So this synergy is absolutely amazing in Pure Fiction. I recently showed it off on stream where I used Ruan Mei, HMC, Lingsha, and Himeko. You could honestly probably use different supports if you don't feel like using Ruan Mei and HMC in particular, but I just wanted to use them just so Lingsha and Himeko would be able to quickly break enemies and then unleash a bunch of follow-up attacks. So that synergy is definitely amazing in my opinion. As I can see here though, Firefly actually went up in Pure Fiction as well, which I would assume the reason for this is primarily because of the fact Firefly can implant enemies with fire weakness. So let's say you were playing a Pure Fiction stage, no fire weak enemies or not many fire weak enemies. Because Firefly is able to implant fire weakness, this will now allow Lingsha to not only trigger Ember's Echo pretty often whenever Firefly uses her skill outside of her ultimate, but also be able to help contribute towards breaking enemies. And because of the fact that Lingsha hits all enemies with, once again, her skill, ultimate, and follow-up, this synergy is just really good for Pure Fiction. So this, in my opinion, I feel like makes it valid for Firefly to have gone up just because of the synergy that Lingsha and Firefly do have with one another. Blade also went up, which I think that is super fun. Blade is also able to hit multiple enemies as well. So this is really nice. I'd actually love to read above in a second here why they bumped up Blade, but we'll take a look at that in a moment here. And then if we keep going, so they did drop Genuine and they did drop Serval as well as Moze. Oh my gosh, Moze! He went all the way down here. I would assume Moze's down here though, mainly because of the fact that he is able to inflict the prey state on a single enemy with this skill. But because Pure Fiction is a mode that focuses on a bunch of mobs, it can more than likely make Moze lack a bit because of that factor. So I can see why they dropped him. Tier 5 is really steep, but I mean, it is what it is, especially when he is primarily focusing only on that enemy that is inflicted with the prey state, which with this skill would only be one enemy in a mode that has a bunch of mobs. So for Pure Fiction, they have bumped up Argenti, and he's one of the best characters you can bring into the mode. Blade went up due to the fact that he does work really nicely along Jade, so I can understand that for sure. Jade and Blade is just a super fun team. and they're really nice when it comes to just unleashing a bunch of follow-ups. Firefly went up because of Lingsha, which I'm not too surprised about this. Firefly being able to implant the fire weakness, of course, with her skill and technique, allows Lingsha to break enemies super frequently. Lingsha to just... Now, what's really interesting, though, is that they dropped Ruan Mei, which is... It seems like it's primarily because of their data. I think there was a little typo here. They said she still sits just behind Ruan Mei in average score. I'm assuming they meant to say Robin. I feel like they personally could have kept Ruan Mei, honestly, in tier 0. I don't know if the drop was honestly necessary. I do feel like Robin is a really, really nice buffer for pure fiction, but I feel like because of the fact that Ruan Mei allows you to break faster, that is still a very nice synergy to consider, of course, with Firefly. Oh my gosh, this is so long. This is really nice to consider with Firefly, and this is also really nice to consider even with Himeko, because if you're able to break enemies faster, that means more follow-ups for Himeko, which Ruan Mei improves the weakness breaking efficiency of the team, and this can also, of course, help with Lingsha breaking faster. So that's why I feel like they honestly could have kept Ruan Mei in tier 0, just have her alongside Robin for pure fiction. But I'd love to know what you guys think, if they should be beside each other for pure fiction, or if you would say that Robin does deserve to be in her own tier when it comes to pure fiction, at least. So the reasoning for Genuine, I guess I can understand this, especially if there is, you know, some data to back this up. A lot of people have played him in pure fiction, and he seems to not be able to, I guess, be up to snuff per se. I would have to honestly test this myself to see if I would fully agree with this, because I haven't really used Genuine recently in pure fiction, so not too sure on this opinion. I'd love to know if you guys have tried Genuine in pure fiction, if you feel like he is worthy of dropping just 0.5. It's not a really big drop, but still it is a drop nonetheless. So I'd love to know if you guys think he should have dropped, or if he probably could have stayed in 1.5. Regardless, though, he still is in the meta character category, so that's at least pretty nice. The rest of the pure fiction tier list looks pretty good in my eyes, or pretty decent at least. We do have Jade very high up in tier 0. We have Himeko, Herta, Argenti. The usual characters you would assume are in tier 0 for pure fiction, so I think this tier list is alright for the most part. And lastly, Apocalyptic Shadow, just so we can go through this real quick. Lingsha is also in tier 0 here. I can also agree with this. I did play her on the second half, and I do feel like she actually performed very nicely. So I can understand her being there. She also is going to, of course, be able to heal the team very well, be able to unleash her follow-ups, her ultimate, her skill, whatever it may be, just to help contribute towards weakness breaking enemies. So I can agree with her being in tier 0 for Apocalyptic Shadow. And of course, we have Boothill and Firefly both in tier 0. We have Feixiao in tier 0. And then if we keep looking, Robin is actually in 0.5 for Apocalyptic Shadow, which I think is pretty interesting. I believe they have this little watch symbol though, because they might actually bump her up to tier 0, which I do play Robin quite a lot in Apocalyptic Shadow, and I do feel like she could honestly be a tier 0 character for that mode in particular. Her buffs are just very, very valuable, and her being able to advance forward the entire team can definitely help you out when it comes to just being able to get a good action value score for the mode. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. If we look through the rest of the list, I think everyone is in decent placements. There's definitely a lot of characters here in this meta character category for sure. I do think this list is pretty decent for the most part. I would definitely say Feixiao is just absolutely incredible when it comes to Apocalyptic Shadow. I'd love to know though if you guys do feel like Acheron should be alongside her, or if you think this placement's fine. I will say though, after playing Feixiao in Apocalyptic Shadow, she absolutely shreds through the bosses, like no joke. And it's really fun to see just her being able to deal so much damage. And if you guys have been in my recent streams, I feel like you've heard the line, "Victory is inevitable," like, like a bunch of times by now. But yeah, overall, I think this list is pretty decent. Love to know if you guys would highly switch someone. Like, let's say you feel like, I don't know, Jiao Shou should be up in the Apex characters for Apocalyptic Shadow. I'd love to know these things. And overall, I feel like when it comes to just, I guess, summing it all up, when it comes to at least Lingsha, I think she's a very, very nice sustained option. And I have said this in my previous videos. Do I think she's a must-have? No, I wouldn't say that. It's really hard for me to say a lot of characters are must-haves, but if I were to look at characters that I feel like are the closest thing to, I guess, something you would really like on your account or would really benefit your account, I usually typically look at Robin and Ruan Mei the most, just because of their supportive capabilities being able to assist a good amount of teams just from all the amounts of buffs that they can provide. So when it comes to Lingsha, I do think she's a very good option if you are looking for another sustain or you're really into her design. So it ultimately comes down if you're really into her kit aspects and of course if you want the character, but you shouldn't also feel pressured to pull for her. I will say that, especially if you are potentially interested in the reruns next patch. I would highly recommend, if you haven't pulled her yet, you're on the fence about it, wait until, I believe the live stream should be this Friday. I would wait until then to see if you fully want Lingsha or if you're maybe more interested in a rerun. Let's say you've been waiting for Acheron. You never know, Acheron might be a rerun next patch. I wouldn't say it hurts at all to wait for that live stream. I usually recommend that for the second half, so that would be my advice. And also, we will be getting drip marketing very soon, which is essentially them teasing the upcoming characters for the patch after the next patch, which I know a lot of people really want Sunday, so never know. We might get Sunday, finally, I hope. I want Sunday myself. Sunday's pretty cool. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see for that. That would be my general advice, though, when it comes to if you should pick up Lingsha or not if you haven't already. And I thought I'd also ask, for those that did pull for Lingsha, how have you all been enjoying her? I've been rambling for enough for today, and I hope all of you did enjoy this video. And if you did, do make sure to subscribe, leave a like to support the video, and I hope all of you have a great one like always. Peace.